Chapter 9 deals with social networks, and we'll talk briefly about Web 2.0 as well, and what Web 3.0 and on has in store for us. So let's start first with Web 2.0. What exactly is that? Ironically, well, let's start first with the definition. It's just a term used anytime we're talking about how we have an interactive relationship on the web today. People collaborate, they share information back and forth, they interact with one another. Now, in the early days of the internet, it was all one way. Companies created websites that displayed information, and you could view it, but you couldn't contribute, you couldn't comment. It was strictly information being pushed out. Web 2.0, there is no actual standard Web 2.0. It was actually a phrase that was created by a speaker before a conference. He just came up with the phrase as to Web 2.0. There's no industry standard that defines what that is. But there are Web 3.0, Web 4.0 concepts under development that deal with artificial intelligence and, really taking the internet to the next level. One of the issues I have currently with the website and the webs in general and our search engines is that you get too many results when you put in a search term. It gives you tons and tons and tons of stuff that isn't really what you were looking for. We need much smarter ways to find that information, to find that needle in the haystack. And I believe as we get into Web 3.0 and 4.0, incorporating artificial intelligence in there, we'll be able to get much better at filtering out the information that we want. Now, another thing that Web 2.0, when you hear someone talk about it, they're really talking about this concept of social media as a way of interacting with one another. Again, that just wasn't possible in the early days. Web 1.0, we had some chat rooms, but it really wasn't the dynamic interchange that we have today. One of the things that allowed Web 2.0 really to develop is this concept called Ajax. If you hear the term tossed around, what Ajax did is it looked at the screen, and when you make a change, say you move the mouse, it said, we don't need to redraw the entire screen just because the mouse moved a quarter of an inch. All we need to do is to send the information for the pixels on the screen that changed. If we don't send new information, leave the old one in place. Prior to that, whenever you changed information on a page, it had to redraw the entire page. And so with Ajax and its success, subsequent protocols allowed us to develop graphic-rich user interaction on websites that could load quickly. Now, a little side note on that, web programmers get carried away with thinking that everyone is on the highest speed using the fastest computer, and sometimes they put way too much information on a website and it slows down how quickly pages change and update for average users or people that don't have, that are out in remote areas, don't have access to full bandwidth. So make sure that your web programmer is testing your website out on slower machines to make sure that it will render properly and have an acceptable response time. Tagging, all of you are well familiar with that with social media. where you associate a certain piece of information with an item by attaching a keyword to it. Most typically, you see this when a photo is tagged in someone's social media account. One thing that happens automatically that a lot of people don't realize is that every picture you take with your smartphone and then post on your social media contains information, what device it was taken on, so it has in there the make and model of your cell phone, what time it was taken, and it has the geographic location. The longitude and latitude information is embedded in every photograph, every picture that you take on a digital smartphone and upload to the internet. And ironically, that information has been used to track down a few criminals who didn't realize when they took that selfie of themselves on the beach celebrating their bank heist that the authorities could look on that and know exactly which beach they were on and then go down and go looking for them and arrest them. Another term you might hear, it's not in place so much these days, but it's really simple syndication RSS feed. That's where you could subscribe to a particular news feed. They had them by topics and by industries, and you get that kind of running ticker tape on your monitor, especially during elections or major disasters. A lot of times TV stations will have running along the bottom this constantly updating piece of information. But something that is used a lot, certainly in the personal world, people use them a lot, but businesses are using them. And the idea of a blog, a lot of companies, the CEO has their own blog. I like to go to Marriott's CEO blog because he doesn't talk all about business. I think his posts most of the time are a good example of how businesses can use it. It's not it's not full of all these marketing things of what's so special about Marriott, although occasionally he'll talk about something when they've launched a new promotion, some major event. But a lot of the times he's just talking about he just got back from spending the weekend at the lake with his grandkids and how much fun he had, and it's just personable. And it helps give a softer feel to the company. You feel like they're real people, they're not just an entity. And so I encourage you, go to Marriott's website, find the CEO's blog, and see what he's talking about today. Wikis we mentioned earlier in the course when we talked about implicit and explicit knowledge and how we capture a lot of the explicit knowledge in the organization through our policies and our procedures, and especially if you're ISO 9000 certified, you've got those things well documented. But a lot of the, tribal knowledge kind of information is not captured, and wikis can be a great tool for capturing that information. We also mentioned earlier about crowdfunding websites. Remember with the Photoshop, that was where it was not a financial transaction, but someone needed help in photoshopping that picture of their infant daughter. You can certainly use those same sites to set up, places where people can donate money to someone who had a disaster happen to their house, the victim of a flood, all kinds of different things. As I mentioned in the earlier lecture on that, you do have to be careful because there's not a lot of oversight on these crowdfunding websites. How do you know that the money is really going to be used for what they say it's going to be used for? Now, if you know the person setting up the crowdfunding and it's among friends and family, well, certainly that's okay. But if it's a stranger that you're not familiar with, you might want to do a little bit of investigation to make sure that it truly does go to the purpose that they said it would go to. We're going to talk more about this in class as to what role social media can play in terms of, really in politics, regime change, social justice. It's a very powerful tool. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that in class. Now, I do want to take you on, this is a presentation that IBM developed a few years ago. It's interesting. We'll talk about a few of the slides. There's more examples they have in. I'm not going to go through the entire presentation that they created. But let's look at some real life examples of social media where things went wrong for a business. So this was a few years ago, but Dell, there was a post made by an influential blogger that Dell really was not living up to his expectations. And so he, as you can see, Dell sucks, Dell lies, pretty negative comment. Now the problem is that Dell did not respond to the blogger. And thousands of people were reading it. And those people were then reposting it to others. And it just grew and grew. So the lesson here is that you have to respond quickly, especially to negative posts. Otherwise, your brand's reputation gets tarnished. Now this one is kind of a classic blunder. CVS Pharmacy, CVS cares. But they locked it as a private Twitter ID, so they couldn't have any interaction. So that shows how much CVS Pharmacy really cares. The takeaway from there is that you do have to have a competent social media team that does test out everything before you go live. Make sure it's working exactly as you intended it to work. This is a supermarket chain. I'm not sure what part of the country they're located in because I've never seen any in my travels. Looks like it might be New York based on the information there. But in any case, one employee actually got into an argument back and forth with one of their customers. And boy, what a bad thing to do. So the key takeaway there is that if you're going to give an employee access to your social media account, you need to make sure they have gotten thorough training on how to handle negative comments and how to respond in a respectful, professional way. This one, Domino's employees with too much time on their hand created a rather disgusting video on YouTube. And, it ended up costing them their jobs. It was a stupid thing to do. But the takeaway from here, besides obviously you need to train your employees what they can and cannot do when it comes to when it affects the company, but there are programs out there that will monitor everything that is going on all the different social media platforms that reference your company's name. so that you can immediately find out if someone has tweeted an inappropriate statement about your company or posted a YouTube video that is damaging, so that you can react to it. So you just need to invest in that. It's automated, so you don't have to be constantly looking at everything that everybody is posting. And this one is boy, what an example of what not to do. When they released a statement that Ryanair's policy is not to waste time and energy in corresponding with idiot bloggers. Lunatic bloggers can have their own, the blog sphere all to themselves. Bad, bad, bad. So again, you need to respond to negative posts, but it has to be done in a positive way. And you have to, what people want to hear is that they've been heard. I hear what you're saying, and I can see how that's a problem. Let me look into it, and then I will get back to you with what we're going to do about it. And then respond back. After looking into this, we determined that this is what happened, and this is what we're doing to fix the problem. If you do that, then you can really put an end to this. You can just stop the negativity and you can move on, and it won't be a big deal. So key takeaways from some of the examples we looked at: you have to respond quickly. It's your brand name that's out there, and whatever's being said, you need to react to it very quickly. You have to have a plan for the worst case scenario. So when some disgruntled employee posts an inappropriate video on YouTube, what are you going to do? Be prepared. You need to have someone who is in charge of all of this, and they need to be well versed and skilled in social media. And lastly, every employee is a potential spokesperson for your brand. Everyone. And that includes top executives. The CEO of Marriott needs to have had training and periodically updated training on social media protocol and best practices. And so everyone that's going to be involved in any way needs to be thoroughly trained. Okay, continuing on. A mashup is just when you take two or more sources of information and you blend them together to create a new piece of information. For example, housingmaps.com displays house prices for various states in the US, and they do that by taking the real estate database and overlaying that on top of Google Maps. Craigslist also has one that we'll look at in class that will take the apartments that are available, what they're renting for, and overlay that on the map. Another one I always find interesting is crime mapping, where you can get the police activity and have it displayed on a map of your city. Now, not all cities subscribe to crime mapping, and so it's unfortunate Portland doesn't. It would be interesting to look at that, but we'll look at one of the cities in class. And that's really a high level on Web 2.0 and social networks. Social media is extremely important to business. We have an entire class on social media marketing at PCC. There's obviously, we could spend a lot more time on this, but unfortunately, it's just one of the topics we have to cover this term. So consider this a high-level introduction to it. There's a lot more